Hey everyone, I'm rather Incoherent, and today we're going to be talking about Rita Young. Rita is a character with a very weird stat spread and a card pool that almost gets it to work, but at the end, even with all the support she's had, as much as she's been given, I still don't feel like she's all there. Rita's gotten so many good things over the past 3 or so expansions, and for people who already thought Rita was okay, they probably think Rita's genuinely pretty good now. I originally thought Rita was a dumpster fire pretending to be an investigator, and now I think Rita's kind of okay. I don't have her in my F tier, but I do have her in my D tier. I think she can perform her role in a campaign, and I think the only role in a campaign she could really perform well is fighter. And the reason for that is partly her 3-fist, but mostly because of what card she's allowed to use to make this 5-foot into a proactive stat as a red character. Before we get any further in though, let's start talking about Rita as a character card, and then go over to some decks. Her stat line of 3-head, 2-book, 3-fist, and a 5-foot really needs you to leverage that 5-foot for it to be a remotely acceptable stat line. 3-head, 5-foot, and Survivor of all classes is very Mythos resilient, but you still don't like to see 5 Horror Soak. She's also somewhat naturally leaned towards fighter, with the 3 and fist allowing her to fight a little bit better than she can clue and book, but really she's going to be reliant on somehow leveraging this foot. As a reaction, after you evade an enemy, you can either deal it damage or move it to a connecting location. Not it, yourself. You move yourself to a connecting location. Limit once per round. Now this makes her dodging better and inherently leans her even further towards fighting because her ability does nothing to help her find clues. And in terms of enemy management, while I don't like relying on dodging, Rita often can use her more efficient dodging where she's able to trip an enemy and then get running immediately to actually put herself in a position where it's a better way of dealing with enemies, even hunter enemies, than it otherwise would be. Still worse than killing them, don't get me wrong, but she's better at dodging than many other characters that might be forced to. Coming down to her deck building options, she's Mono Survivor with trick cards 0 to 3. And trick cards are pretty exclusively rogue events, so there are some outliers. So what do we have? We have an ability that's kind of mediocre unless you're specifically going to evade an enemy and run from it. Otherwise, it just allows you to deal 1 damage and trip a guy like Bad Sweeping Kick. But Sweeping Kick's great, so having that as an ability you have all the time isn't terrible. She does have access to Dirty Fighting. That's a trick that's not an event, it's in the asset slot. And that lets her really meaningfully leverage this in an offensive way, the same way that a Finn Edwards can. So there are ways for her to make this work as a fighting stat line, but it's not inherently good. Like, you have some setup. You need to get a Dirty Fighting in play, and let's get over to a real deck since we keep mentioning Dirty Fighting. This is an example of a Rita Young that just fights with normal weapons and uses Dirty Fighting to get that number to be much better. The issue with a deck like this is that even with Dirty Fighting giving you a +2 and a +1 from Fire Extinguisher, you're still only swinging at like a 6. If you're relying specifically on Dirty Fighting, you have a combo piece you have to hit to be able to use your weapons, and the deck feels, well, terrible. Because it is. I don't recommend you play a Rita like this. This cannot be the thing you're aspiring to at an end of a campaign, because it's just not good enough. It's too janky if you're just using Dirty Fighting to barely beat a 4-fist enemy in the first place. You need to do better than that. So that brings us over to an alternative strategy. Let's use Ornate Bow. It actually lowers the experience cost of the deck a lot. You're still using Backpack to search it out. You still have a Meat Cleaver backup weapon, which is on par with what she was previously using anyway. And you still have Dirty Fighting, and you have action and efficiency with the bow. We're going to have to address the bow a lot because it's really important to Rita and not super important to anyone else when you're talking about optimizing. The Ornate Bow is a 4-cost 2-hand asset weapon that only holds 1 ammo and has a limit of 1 ammo. You can't exceed it. You can spend that ammo to fight with foot and +2 foot no less to deal 3 damage, but then you're out of ammo and you have to use an action to knock another arrow and place an ammo back on the Ornate Bow. The good news is that means you have infinite ammo. The bad news is that you have to go through the trouble of doing this every time you shoot, and for 2 actions you deal 3 damage, which is a rate of 1.5 damage per action, meaning that this is less action efficient than hitting a dude for 2 with any of the dozens of weapons in the game. Where it's advantageous is that its burst, its first action, deals 3, so if somebody needed to kill a 3 health enemy with a machete, you just do it faster and end up using the same actions. And where it's disadvantageous is in any situation where the enemy lives, you now need to knock the arrow and you're in an awkward spot. If you're in a situation where you need to kill a rat, then you're going to be in a problem. And you might say, Rita can just use her ability to kill the rat, but you have to engage somebody to dodge them. So unfortunately, it's still 2 actions to kill the rat, whether you shoot over and then reload the bow or engage and evade. By the way, do the second one, don't risk hitting for 3. So she's not great at killing rats. In terms of killing 2 health dudes, she's probably worse than pretty much anyone else. In terms of killing 3 health guys, the Ornate Bow actually has her being one of the better characters in the game. And then when you get to higher health guys, it gets more complicated. At 4 health, she's pretty transparently, again, not very good. But Sweeping Kick allows her to deal with particularly large enemies, not like in-game bosses with 20 health, but if you're just dealing with an enemy that has like 6 health, 5 health, you can Sweeping Kick, hit them, dodge them. If they have 6 health, use your ability to deal an extra damage, dirty fight them, put the bow into them, and then on your second action, reload the bow. Considering how much damage you deal how quickly with Sweeping Kick, Dirty Fight, or Ornate Bow, that's really impressive burst. She's bad in a lot of situations that are very common and excels in a situation that like specifically deep wind bowl, right? Like that's the specific situation that she's going to really mess up is a deep wind bowl. And it's worth noting that even some enemies that are uniquely hard to deal with, like the Cochleal Stag from Hemlock Vale, because Sweeping Kick, your first part of that combo, exhausts it, you actually prevent it from running away with its elusive trait, right? It's a really, really strong combo. It's something unique to Rita. It's a way she pops off that no F tier character ever gets. Rita absolutely deserves to be in D tier despite how awkward her fighting can be, but you end up with a character that's either having to work around an Ornate Bow or has a really bad fist and has to like specifically find dirty fighting, and you can cram a lot of draw into the deck, but Backpack can't find dirty fighting, man. And it feels really sketchy having a Rita on your team and knowing she needs to find dirty fighting, knowing she needs to find bow and waiting for her to do that. So the solution that you might think of when I say all this is, well, don't play her as the main fighter. If she's not the person responsible for killing rats, she's not the person responsible for killing 2 health ghouls. She doesn't need to single-handedly kill a 20 health boss. All of these problems vanish in the wind, right? So let's go over, not to a starter deck, but to a flex deck. This is a deck where you run Bewitching, you have 1 Breaking and Entering, 1 Pilfer, 1 Sweeping Kick. As you engage guys, you get those, and you use the bow. And it's not that much more XP heavy, so what's the problem? Well, first, how are we going to pay for recurring this Pilfer? That's the first big question. Because the bow is already incredibly expensive for a survivor economy, right? Then moving on from that, the only things that find clues are Pilfer and Breaking and Entering, and sure, you essentially start with them. Draw an enemy on anyone, and you can start playing those cards and recurring them because your foot value is so high. But that makes you uniquely autofail vulnerable because you don't cycle your deck and you only have 1 of each of these. This deck is Disneyland. There's no way for me to describe Flex Rita where it actually works. Because Ornate Bow and Pilfer are both so expensive, it's incredibly hard to fit them in the same deck. Being Survivor with only tricks means she has red economy plus easy marks, and it makes it very hard to pay for multiple Pilfers. It's already hard to pay for the Ornate Bow. It's incredibly hard to pay for both at once. And the only way you're getting clues is with these events, which is super expensive. Rogues can manage it, but survivors, not really. And additionally, rogues have cards like Thieves Kit that help fuel this archetype where Rita doesn't. I think this is the example of a deck that is completely fictional, where when you first look at it, it's sick. And then if you try to play it, you're going to immediately encounter some tremendous economy problems that make this completely non-functional. Additionally, this is a flex character that's entirely reliant on Ornate Bow to function, and if you miss it, like your fighter might, you are a flex character that is just a very bad clover and cannot fight at all. At least you can evade enemies in that situation, whereas you're not completely useless on the enemy front like you might otherwise be on a flex character that missed all their weapons. But it's not a good thing to say you're a flex and have scenarios where you're like, I don't know, I can't kill anything. You won't put pressure on your fighter the way other people will, but you can cause a lot of recursive action loss on yourself playing a flex Rita, where you just have to keep dodging a guy because no one else has the time to deal with them, and you're the one who's supposed to be able to deal with them, but you missed your main method of doing it. So every version of Rita encounters some problem. The economy and flex, the reliance on the bow and a fighter, making her very awkward at dealing with certain enemy values, or just having a janky enough deck. This has 45 experience, but like you can get by without either of these weapons. Time Worn Brand is super bells and whistles. This deck's online actually very quickly. Nightmare Bauble Relic Hunter is 6 experience that's completely unnecessary. Like this is actually a very cheap deck. Don't be fooled by this. But like, this deck has to find dirty fighting to function, and even then it never swings at good numbers. If 5 Fist dude shows up, you might kill him by tripping him repeatedly, because it's that much harder for you to hit 5 Fist when your total number with a Time Worn brand is 7. With anything else, which, you know, is going to be most of the campaign, it's 6. It just feels really, really hard for Rita to get there. And this deck also needs breaking and entering. These are all like rough Rita decks that I quickly brought up because I apparently deleted my old Rita deck in frustration. It's just very frustrating for me because I can't make the economy for Flex Rita work. Difficulty 0 Rita might allow Rita to play a Clover role in a way that she deserves more credit for, but then she has like a useless ability and she's worse than every Foot Matter rogues at actually getting clues, so it's still a weak character. She feels at her best fighting, but whether she's struggling with her bad fist value or struggling with her innate bow, it doesn't really matter. She's struggling with something, and coming down to the starter deck where you only have 1 dirty fighting and you can't run a bow, main fighter Rita has felt terrifying in every scenario one I've seen her, and I think I've seen her in, I think it's only 2 campaigns. It might be 3, I'm pretty sure it's 2. But Rita's just not that strong. She's not that strong at level 0, she's not that strong in a lot of different situations depending on how you build her. And then over the course of a campaign, I don't think she's bad. I think she is like 7th worst. I think she's got a lot going wrong for her. But despite all of these criticisms about how she can feel janky, janky isn't a failure. Needing to find a specific card can suck, but your team can throw a deep knowledge at you and your deck can have a lot of draw in it. We're running Backpack 2 for Christ's sake, right? Like, you can, as Rita, find the cards you need and do your job. Your teammates can help cover for your weaknesses. When I've had Fighter Rita on my team, I've picked Flex characters to help compensate specifically for the Rita, the same way I would if I were getting a Finn Edwards. And Finn Edwards is like the character I point to when I'm like, Rita's not doing it. Because Fighter Finn has the same scenario 1 weakness that Rita does, but he goes straight to the moon with just a little bit of experience. But Rita has so much less draw than Finn does. Her ability is so much less action efficient than Finn's. Her stat line is so much worse than Finn's. Even as a fighter that wants to use your foot, it's so much worse than Finn's. To elaborate briefly on this sentiment, since I didn't really explain it, and on the paper, it looks like Rita's stat line is better than Finn's if you're not caring about your book. The reason Finn's stat line is better is because his card pool is tremendously better at leveraging it, and his action economy is so strong that it's actually conceivable for a big money Finn to use that book and find clues on dead turns that a clunky Rita almost will never have, whether she be knocking a bow or drawing desperately for it. The main reason his stat line is better is due to the cards available to leverage it. Anyway, back to my past self. Let me go check where Rita was in my previous tier list, because I want to know how far I've moved her down. Alright, this is exactly what I thought. Rita Young is what I'm viewing right now as the 8th weakest character in the game, and at the bottom of D tier, it looks like my opinion on Rita has really soured since last time. But she's really a victim of the tier list reformatting. I mentioned this in the announcement video for this series, I'm gonna say it again. This is no longer a tier list about how well you do against the campaign. And the reason for that is because there are characters that I confidently believe are amongst the worst in the game, like Amina, where I have done my role successfully. And because of that, you end up with a campaign tier list where everyone's in C tier or above. There's only like 4 tiers. You have to have an A+ to create a 5th one. Everyone's stacked in the top 4 tiers, like all the characters are above C tier. It's a really small tier list where essentially the takeaway is, yeah, everyone's great. So I restructured it like this so that it could be relative to other investigators. What is your relative power level compared to what else you could have played, as opposed to the campaign? Because if you are an optimizer with a full card pool, you should be beating the campaign. So right now Ivor is my 8th lowest investigator. And coming over to the YouTube tier list, she looks a lot better at the bottom of B tier and good, but this is only the 9th best character. She's fallen 1 slot because Kaimani has skyrocketed up the tier list after getting a replay, which is something I was speculating about in the tier list. My opinion on Rita in terms of the overall investigator pool has only decreased very slightly. I still think she can do her role and that like your teammates should see that someone picked a Rita and want to have it like a way to compensate. Your Clover's like, oh, there's a Rita? I'll pick up a Ravenous Myconid or an Occult Lexicon. Your Flex is like, oh, Rita's the main fighter? I'll be fully self-sufficient. I'll be Kaimani. I will make sure that I never make your life harder than it needs to be, right? The rest of your team can see that you pick a Rita and help cover for those weaknesses in the Ornate Bow. And that should happen when you pick a Rita. Characters above her don't have that. It's the same thing with like Bob, where it was like Bob needs this specific team composition so he can be the 2nd Clover. And Rita needs her teammates to help cover for the fact that she's dealing damage in weird intervals incredibly efficiently and in any other interval very badly. Maybe she's just playing the dirty fighting deck and you slot in a Jessica Hyde and now her economy's a bit rough and you want a rogue running Falsian Bargain, or like a Trish running Falsian Bargain and Deep Knowledge, and like, yeah, maybe just like support yourself and stop investing into Rita. You're obviously the more important character in that team, but like, you can make character concessions in your teammates to overall improve the quality of your team. And like, if you've got a main fighter Rita, you will be better off doing something that makes that Rita safer against enemies, like running a Ravenous Myconid in a Min deck, than you will just playing Rex and telling Rita, like, it's your job, you have to handle it. Because Rita will struggle. The team support Min that helps deal with enemies will be more valuable in that team than a pure Clover Rex that just tells Rita to do her job and turns up his nose at the idea of caring about what your teammates do. But that's still a loss in power, right? I think Rex is much better than that in a general sense, and I'd much rather play a Rex with just like one of these other fighters that I wouldn't need to compensate for. Rita is good enough to fight, and in a team that supports her, she will never feel weak. But relative to other investigators, like, there are a lot of fighters that don't have these problems, man. She can't play Flex, and I don't think she can play Clover, though I've never looked at it too hard. If she had more economy, if she had a better way of boosting her foot than just adding more cost and more setup to the deck, not boosting her foot, boosting her fist, I don't know which I said. Rita's so close to being good, like genuinely good and breaking into C tier, but the deck is just out of card slots. I don't know what gets cut to make her better if new support gets printed. When I say Rita's weak, I mean relative to other investigators, relative to other fighters. Even fighters directly above her like Roland and Tommy are fighters where they just do their job and you don't need to compensate on the rest of the team. And the fact that Rita needs that to excel in the same way that a Roland or Tommy would is really painful. She's still able to do her role. She's able to beat the campaign pretty consistently, in my opinion. And that's why I have her above Amina. Amina, I feel like I optimize and I'm just functional and I get through the campaign. With something like a Rita or a Marie, I feel like when my deck is optimized, I have pop-off turns. There are turns where that character does something no one else could, and I feel genuinely strong in a way that Amina never does. And I think Rita's struggle to deal with like any part of her deck. You have to pick what your problem is and then deal with that for the whole campaign. Whether it's your economy, your ability to deal with 2 health chump ghouls, whatever it is, you have a problem and it's going to be very hard to deal with. But you have a strength as well. I just don't think it's nearly enough to counteract it. I just want a fighter that can actually fight everything and doesn't have problems. And being a 3-fist fighter with her card pool, it just isn't there. It's not enough. And I wish it was, because Rita's cool. I like seeing Rita. But, man, I feel like I'm going in circles trying to make her sound better. I keep wanting to be like, look, guys, I know I'm saying Rita's the 7th worst character in the game or whatever, but trust me, bro, she's sick as hell. And that's kind of how I feel about Rita. Like, she's not terrible. She really isn't. She does her job, and needing help from your team isn't a terrible thing. There are incredible characters like Mark Harrigan that are incredible because of how they help their team. You want to play a fighter like a Finn Edwards that struggles in scenario 1? Hell, like a Rita, because she does too. Mark is a flex character that starts off as pretty much a fighter with 2 copies of Winging It, man. You can bring a flex Mark to help your scenario 1 fighter that's weak in scenario 1 and then build into flex. He is the best character in the game for doing that. Making concessions for your teammates isn't this thing where it's like always bad. It's a way that your team can be made more powerful. The campaign where we had Fighter Finn Flex Mark is one of the strongest runs we've ever had. We steamrolled Circle Undone. I don't even remember who our Clover was. I just remember getting a shitload of clues as Mark and being really happy about it. But getting back to Rita, the point is that I genuinely think covering for her weaknesses doesn't make the character terrible. The problem is that when you cover for her weaknesses, once you've made these concessions, she still has like the thing she excels in is relatively niche. And there are so many characters with like similar or less weaknesses than her that don't need the same concessions. For now though, I'm done. I've been rather incoherent. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about Rita and why she's such a uniquely strange fighter, her bizarre weaknesses, her incredible strengths, and why on the whole I think it's not a good deal. If you did, then like, comment, subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And a massive thank you to those who support me over on Patreon. I'll see you in the next one.